Pot in My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Welcome back, everybody, to Pod in My Noggin. Thanks for tuning in another week. Today, we are joined by someone across the pond. In the UK, or just outside, I think is what you said. UK?
Just outside Oxford. So, yeah, pretty much
Oxford.
in the middle.
Perfect. All right. And your name, sir, is Duncan, and I'm going to try it. Bhaskaran Brown.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. You should be a hot podcast host.
Well, I try, but how would you say it?
Bhaskaran, yeah, Duncan Bhaskaran Brown. So it's my wife's name. So
Okay.
my wife is British Indian, and when we got married, she didn't want to be Mrs. Brown because that's basically a bad joke. So we combined our names and created the one and only Bhaskaran Brown family. I mean, literally, we are the only one.
But I like it. It's very modern, for one, and for two, it's a great name. So I think my thing, what I did there was I added a little too much inflection, right? Because when you see the name, you think to add a bit of inflection. But yes, so we're going to get into your story. For me, getting people's names right is really important, always has been. And I've been in many situations in my life where people will say their name, and I'm looking at their name, and I'm like, yeah, my name's Steven. And I'm like, is that your given name or your white name? Right? And that's what I say to them. And they're like, oh, well, I guess the name when I migrated. I'm like, well, what's your real name? What do you want to be called by? And it's so important to me to do that. But anyway, it's not about me, this show. It's about you. So thanks for reaching out and wanting to be a guest. I find your story very interesting. And I think it's going to be really interesting when we get into it. So as a preface, I just want to read what you wrote, okay? And so that the people at home can see what I saw and then understand what the catch was. So you wrote to me, Duncan drank wine, cider, brandy, what have you got? After 20 years of wanton excess, he cleaned up his act and trained with the world's most successful stop-smoking clinic, which wasn't enough. He studied at Cornell University, the Chartered Management Institute, and the windowless room in Peterborough, which wasn't enough. He wrote a couple of books, including Real Men Quit, The Armchair Macho Guide to Beating Booze, which wasn't enough. He's interviewed sober superstars and conducted research projects which involved watching TV, which wasn't enough. What would be enough? Imagine if alcohol-free was the default, if sober was normal, and if alcohol stops destroying, maybe then Duncan would grab a mint tea and sci-fi novel and relax. Maybe. So out of all the introductions I have received since I started doing this and people I've had to turn away, I have never had someone write something so poetic and immediately captivating. And so this is what I want to get into. Duncan drank. Why did Duncan drink?
Well, do you know, I think we could probably put it down to the fact that not enough people said stuff like that about his writing when he was a kid, you know. So genuinely, thank you so much for that. That's enormously kind of you. And, it makes it all worthwhile. And I guess I always have been a writer, but my reviews have got better over the years. I mean, I think there's one incident that always sticks in my mind when I was young. I was about 9 or 10, and the teacher asked us to write a poem. And I know that if you think about the average 10-year-old schoolboy writing a poem is not going to fill them full of joy, is it? But for me, I was quite excited because I was really into Shakespeare at the time, and yeah, I was one of the cool kids. So I got started. I flew at it, and I really enjoyed myself. I wrote this poem. So pleased with it. So excited. I took it up to the teacher, and the teacher looked at it and went, "Well, you know what, Duncan? Your punctuation is all wrong. You've spelt many of the words badly, and frankly, your handwriting is atrocious." And I said, yeah, but, what about all of the imagery that I've put into it? What about the poetic devices that I've used? What about the assonance and the alliteration? And, what about the writing itself? I mean, I think that's of pretty good quality. And actually, we should just ignore punctuation and grammar and spelling and handwriting because that's not what writing's really about. And the teacher said, see me after school. And that pretty much kind of sums up where I was at with education. I just didn't fit in. It was not for the likes of me. They wanted something, and I did not really value what they wanted, and I had something which they did not really value. So the lesson I really learned at school was that there was no place for me. And of course, that really transferred to the whole of my life. And I found it difficult to find my own place until, I hit my mid-teens and I discovered alcohol, and I thought all my Christmases came at once. I thought it seemed to ease the social anxiety. It seemed to make everything just that little bit easier. It seemed to make me funny, smart, you better looking. It compensated for the fact that I hadn't had a shower. It seemed to like fill in so many holes in my personality. And I was just like, I was all in from the start.
Yeah. So like that's, that story that you just talked about with your teacher, well, it resonates with me. I think it's very much the trying to fit a square into a round hole, or a non-poet or non-artist, if you will, trying to teach poetry in a class as a science. And it's not a science. Poetry is freedom of expression. And so to me, like at 10, to pour yourself into a work of art, your work of art at 10, and then be shot down because of it, to be only highlighted the negatives and not actually someone who could appreciate what was inside maybe the errors in punctuation or spelling or whatnot. That's that's a familiar sense of dejection, I think, one that we both share. Now, I was very lucky with a teacher, but that's a story for another day. So you started drinking in your teen. Like how?
I mean, technically, I started drinking before that. So my parents were of the generation that believed that actually, if you expose your children to alcohol at a young age, they'll learn to drink responsibly. So I was given small amounts of different alcoholic beverages from, a fairly young age. And that doesn't really tally very well with the science, and it certainly did not work for me. I did not learn to drink responsibly. What I learned was to drink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you're saying as a teenager, so I didn't drink when I was a teenager. I think I was very young when my grandfather used to have little beer bottles left over, and I tried it once and it was disgusting and I didn't like it. I didn't drink probably until I was in my late 20s. But being a basket case and anxiety ridden at 20, all of the things that you're talking about, having a drink numbs everything and allows you to just let go and enjoy life and be happy and all of that stuff, right? So on a teenage psyche, that's detrimental.
Yeah. I mean, not just on sort of your outlook and things like that. I mean, the science is fairly clear about how detrimental it is to developing brains. And I think one of the real problems that that you'll find giving alcohol to young people is that the last part of their brain that develops is something called the prefrontal cortex, which your listeners may well have heard of. It's sort of the executive bit of your brain. It's the bit that makes the decisions. It's the bit that does the thinking. It's the bit that is responsible for equating your current actions to future outcomes. And, it's absolutely the last bit to develop it. It's not really fully developed until your mid-20s. And it's the first bit that alcohol gets rid of. So, that's the bit that it depresses and turns off as soon as you start drinking, pretty much. So what you've got is people with highly undeveloped abilities to match their current actions with future consequences, and then you give them a drink that just makes it worse. And, well, who'd have thought it? Teenagers do a lot of stupid things when they're drinking, and they make a lot of decisions that often have consequences for the rest of their life. I mean, certainly the drinking I did as a teenager had consequences for the rest of my life.
Do you feel comfortable with talking about those consequences?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess your listeners are probably thinking something along the lines of, teenage pregnancy, drunk driving, stealing, crashing cars. But no, I mean, it just had this consequence that I learned to drink, and therefore I drank. And, I didn't stop. I drank pretty solidly for 20 years, almost without taking a pause. And trust me, that has a lot of consequences.
So, okay, so you started in your teenage years. You finished school?
Oh, yeah. I went to university. I didn't get an amazing degree, but I went to a very good university, which your listeners probably haven't heard of, because it's the third best university in the UK after Oxford and Cambridge, which means you haven't heard of it. But it's called Durham University, and it's the third oldest, and obviously the third best because I went there. But
so you were a high-functioning alcoholic then?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I struggled a lot in school until I was 16, and then I moved schools to do the A-levels, which are kind of like the high school certificate equivalent, I think. And that's what got me into university. If I'd stayed in the school that I was in to do those qualifications, I would have just failed them all and wouldn't have got anywhere. So I was a little bit lucky that my parents kind of helped out with that. But yeah, I mean, I worked hard and I played hard. That was what I thought I was doing, and that pattern continued. I mean, I was always very involved in politics, involved very much with the British Youth Council and the European Youth Forum. I even did a little bit of work for Tony Blair's government in the very late 90s. Went on a youth fact-finding mission to Argentina. So yeah, I was very successful. Got into local government. First stood for election when I was 22. Became mayor of my hometown in my early 30s. So yeah, I think I've got a reasonable CV. From the outside, it absolutely looked like a success story.
That's a really interesting plot twist for me, right? Because when you say after 20 years of wanton excess, and then so this is like one of those things that's a really great lesson to learn, is that don't read between the lines and don't assume that someone's life was shit because they drank excessively for 20 years. Yeah. So in my mind, I had thought that maybe, your life was extremely dysfunctional. Perhaps you didn't hold jobs very well. I don't know.
Yeah,
why do you think that is?
The thing is, you're kind of part right. It was shit and it was a bit dysfunctional. But I was quite successful, and then I just felt awful and I was miserable all of the time, and my relationships were pretty dysfunctional. And, looking back, I know I could have done an awful lot more. I also think there's something about it where I wasn't really doing what I wanted to do, I wasn't working to the best of my abilities or really working towards what was meaningful and purposeful to me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think, I did a lot of good work, and I made my local community better than it was when I arrived in it. And that's, of course, very important. But, I don't think I was really living out my ambitions. And yeah, I mean, I did genuinely just feel pretty miserable most of the time. It just looked successful on the outside. And I think the assumption that you make is entirely, understandable, and it's very, very common, and people do just think, well, you've got a drinking problem, therefore you're going to be in the gutter, you've lost your job, you lost your family, you've lost your driving license. But the fact of the matter is, the majority of problem drinkers have got jobs. In fact, a lot of them have got quite successful jobs. And my story is really not uncommon. I work with a lot of people, they're senior leaders, they're CEOs, they're successful people, they're high flyers. And they manage to do it whilst drinking. And then, of course, once we get them sober and we get their life kind of more functional and more enjoyable, then they really take off. That's when you see the amazing.
So do you think that the high-performing drinkers are drinking to cope with the stress, or is it like a precursor from something else? So, I know it's not one size that fits all. Like I'm very aware of that. But yeah, in my mind, I think that, for anybody out there who sort of drinks a lot, or maybe even is not aware that they have a drinking problem, like, are you able to sort of summarize, like, and I want to get into that more a little bit later too as well. But yeah, it's very interesting to think, physically, you said you felt like crap, right? Physically, did this 20 years of drinking have lasting effects?
In terms of physical and mental health, not after I'd stopped drinking, no. I mean, that's, I think, one of the really great pieces of news, that your body is amazing. Actually, that sounds like a chat up line, doesn't it? I mean, like, people's bodies are amazing, and they have this extraordinary capacity to, heal and regenerate. I mean, yes, you can do long-lasting damage to yourself by drinking alcohol, but I was on the way to doing that, but stopping cleared up a lot of the medical problems that I developed. My mood improved massively. I think I was probably at the point where if I'd gone to the doctor, I would have been diagnosed with depression. And, if I went to the doctor now, I'd be diagnosed with annoyingly happy. I mean, for me, there are lasting implications to some of the things that I did, but physically, mentally, emotionally, it gets better, and it gets better quickly. I mean, there's often a bit of work involved in that, but the good news is you're unlikely to have done anything to yourself that is irreversible.
Yeah. So I always think the worst case with long-term alcoholics, because of like DTs and liver damage, that sort of thing. So for you, in a day, what was a normal amount of drink?
So I would usually drink wine, and I would usually drink a bottle and a half, 2 bottles, but I would drink it in a very sort of contained way. So I'd get up, I'd go to work, I'd work hard, I'd come home, have something to eat, and then I'd go out again because, like I said, I was very involved in the community. I was always going to meetings, always going to events. And I'd get back home about 9 o'clock, and I'd open a bottle, and I'd drink, between 9, midnight, 12:30, something like that. I'd go to bed, get up, do it all over again.
So it didn't, so it didn't consume your whole life. If you're looking at it on a daily level, it was something that you did, obviously, is to wind down. That was how you closed out a day. Okay. That's helping me shape a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of important to note that it kind of did take over my life for, a couple of different reasons. I mean, partly just because I'd be at those events and I'd be watching the clock and I'd be making sure that, you know, I was out the door before the off license closed so I could go and buy something to drink. You know, and I'd be getting a bit worried if it was getting towards 9:30 because then, you know, the off license closed at 10. And yeah, it genuinely affected the way I was present at events like that. So I thought about it an awful lot. It, of course, basically wrote off the entire morning. I was pretty useless until lunchtime. I mean, I'd go to work and I'd, you know, go through the motions and I'd pretend. But most of the quality work that I did was always after about 2 o'clock. So it did have quite an impact on the day. And actually, if you think about 9 till 12:30, you know, that's 3.5 hours. If you do that 7 days a week, that adds up to, well, slightly over 24 hours, which is, that's an entire day, isn't it? That's yeah, the entire day, including the bit that you're sleeping in. And I think that's something that I really noticed when I stopped. I didn't think it took up a lot of my life, but actually when I stopped, I had so much more time, along with more energy and more kind of intellectual bandwidth, more concentration, more focus. So yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to the other way that it really really affects you. And you sort of mentioned earlier, you know, wanting to escape the stress and wanting to escape the difficult emotions. And that's a very common reason to start drinking. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to run away from my problems. But the thing is, you distract yourself. You distract yourself on kind of like the level of mindset. You also distract yourself at a kind of more neurological, chemical level. And what that means is you stop being able to simply distract yourself from the bad stuff, and you end up distracting yourself from everything. So yes, you don't feel the downs as much, but you don't feel the ups as much either. You just stop enjoying stuff. You just stop feeling emotions. It's called down regulation, and it's basically your brain trying to protect itself from the onslaught of you know, alcohol. But that's the thing. That's why I was miserable all the time, because anything good happened, I just didn't even notice.
You were numb, sort of.
Yeah. And so
Okay.
I didn't quite catch that last bit.
Oh, you're numb. You were sort of
Oh,
numb.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, numb is a fairly good way of putting it. Yes. I mean,
Well, I guess it's the other side. So, like, my brain, and I think I realized I just caught myself. My face is weird when I'm processing. So sometimes I can come off like condescending or bitchy or diminishing, and I am not at all that person. And then I realized that I said, I'm like, well, it didn't really consume your whole life. It wasn't what I meant by that statement was you didn't drink all day long.
no.
Because that's how
And
I also envisioned it, right?
yeah,
So like I want to make sure you understand that that's not who I am. But
no. But I
my
see.
brain is wheels are turning. And the reason they're turning is
That's
because
good. I like
I'm
turning people's wheels.
um now you've embarrassed me. um oh gosh. Okay, yeah. What was I gonna say? People are gonna watch this. Okay, you know what? We're just gonna talk about it. You're an incredibly handsome dude.
Thank you, man.
You are though. You are an incredibly handsome dude. Okay. So also, but that's not why my wheels were turning. My wheels were turning is I think that a lot of us come to the table with a preconception of what alcoholism is. And I definitely did that today. And I really love these moments where I get to sort of check my bias and um like stretch my brain and understand things a little bit better. And that's what you're doing, right? So like I came in thinking that, you know, for 20 years you were, I don't know if I'd go as far as saying like living in the gutter, right? But like just barely functioning, not having, you know, stability, if you
Yeah,
will. Because like
yeah,
when you think alcoholic in my brain before, I've always thought instability. But apparently you can have both. And now I'm trying to figure out like, is the addiction to when you were explaining the watching the clock at functions, like when you were explaining that in my brain, I'm like, God, that's like if I'm in a meeting for too long and I'm like looking at the clock, like when can I go have a cigarette? Like when's my next cigarette? Like, and like planning my day, right? Like, oh my God, I'm in a meeting in 5 minutes. I need to run and have a puff because I could be in there for 90 minutes. So like that's an addiction. So in my brain now, I'm starting to calculate that maybe alcoholism is similar to being addicted to cigarettes.
Yeah, it is exactly the same. And as a diehard smoker when I was drinking, yeah, I know that it's exactly the same thing. So, like, my wife would say, "Do you want to go to the cinema?" And I'd be like, "Well, no, of course not, because that's 3 hours without a cigarette. You must be joking. That's just crazy. Let's stay at home and watch the TV." And it was exactly the same with drinking. You know, I thought a lot about it. You know, if we went on holiday, you know, my wife was sort of often quite surprised that I'd brought a corkscrew with me, and it's like, no. I no, this holiday is going to be not getting in the way of my drinking. We're gonna work this out, and you know, it's like literally everything was planned around it. So if I knew that I was going to be at an event that finished after 10 o'clock, then I'd just go to the shop beforehand. But generally, you know, I'd think, well, it'd be finishing up about 9 o'clock. I mean, even if I'd go to an event where there was alcohol being, I would still make sure I had some at home for when I got home, because I didn't particularly like drinking around other people. I found it quite restrictive sort of thing, I guess. I mean, the thing was, there was always this sort of dilemma with me, that there was part of me which was like, I'm trying to present this front that I am somebody who you would trust to run your town, and then I'm going off and you know, I'm drinking quite heavily, but that was like hidden, that was private. So if I was actually at a function where there was alcohol, I would only ever have one glass, and a lot of people thought I was quite a moderate drinker. They thought I was quite restrained, and it's like, well, I am restrained in front of you, but when I get home, I'm going to open a bottle, strip down to my pants, and stick on a Western, you know.
Fair. We're going to take a break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about what made you decide enough was enough. We'll be right back.
Life in Stitches by CK Sims. Available for purchase in paperback and ebook on all major platforms. Partner today with CK Sims and Pod in My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, we were talking to Duncan about his life as an alcoholic, and I was learning some new stuff and checking my biases and preconceived notions around alcoholism. And so, Duncan, 20 years, wanton excess, right? What made you realize that this has to change? What was that?
So there were a couple of pivotal moments. One of them was around a friend of mine, John. He's a great guy. I met him when I was at university. You know, the life and soul of the party is an expression that was absolutely made for him. You know, to know him was to love him. Larger than life. All of those expressions absolutely fit him. Great guy. And we did a lot of drinking when we were at university. And, you know, I think your listeners will be nodding along going, well, you know, a lot of people do a lot of drinking at college. I think the difference between John and I and a lot of other people was that they went and got serious jobs and sort of dialed back their drinking a little bit, whereas John and I were not ever really intended for employment. So neither of us really got proper jobs. So whilst I was very serious about what I was doing in local government, the earning a paycheck kind of thing was bit of a side issue for me, and I didn't take it particularly seriously. John, on the other hand, just refused to be tethered by anything, and as a result, he drank very, very heavily. He drank all of the time, and he actually died of acute pancreatitis at 27, which it was totally and utterly related to alcohol. And I distinctly remember coming back from his funeral and sort of like thinking to myself, well, this is going to go one of two ways. This is this is one of those choice points. I'm either going to do what John did and just completely go crazy and just untie myself from any sort of restraint, or I'm going to have to accept the fact that I'm going to be a normal human being that lives something like a normal human life and do the kind of things that most people do. And of course, I didn't stop drinking, but I think part of me decided which side of that fence I was going to fall on. And it was always going to be, well, I'm going to do the things that most sort of sensible human beings do. I'm not just going to go completely and utterly crazy. And that kind of, I suppose, coloured a few decisions. Not that long after John died, I met my wife, and we did the things that young couples do, which was a lot of fun. And we moved in together, and we started to build a life, and it got to the point where it's like, well, now we are proper adults. I suppose we should have a family. And we started trying to have a family, which was also quite good fun. And then my wife got pregnant, and we were that classic, like naive, stupid couple, like all of these kind of airy ideas about having a kid, wandering around, smiles on our faces, and it was all amazing until she had a miscarriage. And then it just wasn't amazing. It was just very, very horrible. And I mean, clearly it was incredibly hard on her, emotionally, physically, mentally. It was just very, very difficult. And I know that I made it worse because my default reaction to stress, to hard emotions, to difficult times was always to just drink. So I just kind of poured myself into a bottle of wine and sort of ignored her, which was absolutely the last thing that she needed. And, I never had one of those kind of like staring in front of the mirror at 4 a.m. moments where you kind of have this blinding realization, because secretly, I think those only happen in autobiographies. I don't think they happen in real life. But I spent a couple of months sort of kind of asking myself this question, what do I want from life? I never phrased it quite so simply, but now I look back and I realize what I did was I just kept asking myself, what do you want, Duncan? Who are you going to be? Where's it going to go? What does the future look like? And it ultimately comes down to this one question, do you want another drink, or do you want a family? Good news is, of course, I made the right decision. And almost 9 months to the day after I stopped drinking, our daughter Leela was born. And that was fantastic for about 10 minutes. And then, it gave me a whole other world of problems, but, good problems.
Okay. So I mean, I'm sorry about your friend John, and for both of your loss. Like, I know how you dealt with it, and I know it was hard for her, as it always is. But so it didn't happen like that for you. It was really like an intentional sort of process. What do you want from life? And
I think that's another thing, that it's sort of easy to misunderstand. I guess if you think about a car, we sort of think the moment it stops moving, that's when it's stopped. But actually, it's a process, isn't it? You have to see the reason why you should stop. You have to think about it. You have to stick your foot on the accelerator. Not the accelerator. That's the wrong one. Isn't it? Stick your foot on the brake, and then it slowly slows down until it finally comes to a stop. And stopping drinking is exactly the same. It is a process. And for me, it was about going through that kind of like vague notion that I've got an issue and I've got to do something about it, into fleshing it out more into a kind of like, this is actually a problem. I can see this problem now and I'm aware of this problem, and then doing something about the problem, and then finally getting to that point where I stopped. And actually, for a lot of people, that process involves stopping drinking and then maybe having a little slip up, or what people might call a relapse, or having another drink. And so then it can turn into a bit more of an elongated process, but it is always a process. It is never just like, bang, I'm never going to drink again. And then, occasionally you meet people who say, well, I just got up one morning and decided. And it's like, well, no, you didn't. You thought about it beforehand. You didn't just decide, did you? So it is always a process.
So since you stopped, have you drank since?
So no, I've never deliberately consumed any alcohol. I've doubtless had some in desserts and chocolates and things like that. I have occasionally drink 0.5% beer, which some people would argue is drinking alcohol, but that's basically about as alcoholic as a banana, isn't it? So I don't think that really counts. And then I was in this show, because I'm quite dramatic, don't you know? And there's a bit where the character that I was playing drinks whiskey, and they always use real whiskey because that bunch of thespians are criminally insane and ought to be locked up. So they always actually use real whiskey. And I thought they'd remembered that I don't drink and it was apple juice, but they had forgotten and it was real whiskey. So I accidentally had a shot of Jack Daniels, but I don't think that.
So when that happened, or when anytime that you're around alcohol now, because I'm assuming you're around alcohol.
Oh yeah.
Do you have the urge or craving?
No,
because it's still present?
I stick my hand on my heart and say, you can stick me in a room full of people and they can drink for hours and hours and hours until they all pass out, and it would not bother me in the slightest. I genuinely don't have cravings for alcohol, and I haven't really since I stopped, because the method that I used, which is called cognitive realignment or cognitive restructuring, that method is particularly effective at managing triggers and getting rid of cravings. I mean, to put it very, very simply, I'm going to take a flying guess based on the conversation we've had. You are not a particular fan of heroin. I mean, like, nobody really does heroin anymore. It's all fentanyl. But, those kind of like injection opioids, they're not really your thing. So you probably don't have cravings for heroin because you have no desire to do it. And in the same way, I have no desire whatsoever to drink alcohol, so I don't have cravings.
That's interesting. But is that everybody's story?
No. So there are different ways to get sober, and they all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. The method I use, the particular strength of it is it gives you rock solid trigger management skills. The other methods focus on different things. So some methods don't even really kind of cover trigger management. Some of them, in my opinion, don't cover it very well. So people tend to hit that point of stopping drinking with a different skill set depending on how they've stopped drinking. So a lot of people find a way to cope with it, or other things make it so they get to that point whereby they no longer really want to do it. So if you take Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step program's probably the ones that all of your listeners are thinking about. It doesn't really specifically address trigger management, but if you spend enough time going to AA meetings, you will end up really seriously disliking alcohol. And once you've got to the point where you really seriously dislike it, your brain kind of joins the dots and you end up not really craving it anymore. That is not always true, because it's implicit rather than explicit in the process. But I've met a lot of people who've gone through AA and they don't crave it anymore because of the, listening to enough people sharing their experiences of alcohol has just totally and utterly put them off.
You're recreating neurons, right, in your brain. And cognitive restructuring, I'm quite familiar with. Amazing tool, lifesaver, game changer for a lot of people in a lot of different situations. You said, imagine if alcohol-free was the default, if sober was normal, and if alcohol stops destroying. Why is this so important to you as a message in a broader audience?
Yeah, so, for me, there are a few people who always spring to mind when you say, why is it so important? And, I have seen people transform from being really, really high achievers to being what you think of, that they're drinking all day, they're unable to care for themselves, on a very basic level, they're unable to keep themselves clean, they're unable to feed themselves. They literally, alcohol renders them helpless. And I've seen people go from that, from being very successful, seeming to have it all, and then losing it through alcohol. The good news is I've seen them come back out the other side as well. But I don't think when you've really engaged with that level of suffering that alcohol causes, I don't think you can really stand by anymore. It just, for me, it compels me that I have to do something about it. I don't really have a choice. And yeah, I can tell you horrific stories about individuals, but I can also give you the statistics. And alcohol is the number one killer for people aged between 15 and 49 worldwide. It's implicated in basically all manner of crimes: violence, domestic abuse, murder. It's like, it does so much harm to our society that, I don't see how I could stand by and let that happen. And a lot of it is just simply people do not understand and they do not talk about it. So, for example, in America, people talk a lot about the opioid epidemic. And, I don't want to do down the suffering and misery that people like Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family have caused by thrusting OxyContin onto an uncertain, unsuspecting world. The opioid crisis is genuinely a crisis. It is a wellspring of human misery. I don't want to do that down by any stretch of the imagination. But the simple fact is that opioids kill about 80,000 Americans every year. Alcohol kills more than twice that. It's like 180,000. The difference is massive. But we don't talk about the alcohol epidemic. We talk about the opioid epidemic, but nobody's out there talking about the alcohol epidemic. Yeah, it is far worse for our society. In fact, if you add up all the illegal drugs in the world that have ever been taken, it doesn't even get close to the damage that alcohol does. And it's not even close.
But alcohol's legal.
And why is alcohol legal?
And big business. So it's one of those things, right? It's legalized, big business. It lines a lot of pockets. It's not in money's interest to have people out here addressing the alcoholism of any given country or nation. But then we always sort of sensationalize things as they come up, right? So like pot many moons ago, cocaine many moons ago, 80s, 90s, crack, right? Cocaine was a big thing. Early 2000s was like street drugs, ecstasy, that sort of thing, sensationalist. What was happening, however, lives were being lost, and lives were not at the rate of the opioid crisis, especially with fentanyl, because it's just hidden. So like you could buy something that you don't think is an opioid, and then it's laced with fentanyl and die. But we sensationalize that when we look at alcohol and the lives that it's taken, but also the lives that it's destroyed that never drank a drink in their lives, right? That crisis, that epidemic has been happening forever since the Prohibition, right? During the Prohibition, like when you made it illegal, like I think people drank more. So, it's interesting. So you wrote a book. I can sort of see it right behind you. Do you mind holding it up? Um,
It's sort of stuck to the to the
Fair,
bookshelf
okay, fair,
because
fair,
if I didn't stick it on there, it all keeps falling off. So
fair. I can appreciate the honesty there. So the book is called Real Men Quit. Let's talk about the book.
yeah,
Was this your first one?
so I mean, part of it was I really wanted to kind of get into the the experiences that I'd had with John and sort of talk about that and how that affected me as a man. And at the end of the day, everybody knows somebody whose lives been affected by alcohol, whether it actually killed them or not, or whether it just caused a lot of problems. And that was part of my starting point. But really, there's just not a lot of stuff out there for guys. There are a lot of amazing women in the recovery space who are doing fantastic work, and I really like what they're doing. I really love their stuff. And 9 years sober, it really resonates with me. But I know when I was drinking, I would have found it so easy to dismiss because it did not kind of resonate with my life. It was not a part of the life that I was living. So I wanted to write something for men because men whilst we're not really talking about it, and I know that's particularly unusual for men not to be dominating the conversation, but we're definitely not when it comes to recovery and sobriety. But we are dominating the problems. So men are 2 to 3 times more likely to have a problem with alcohol. According to the World Health Organization, for every 4 drinks that are sold, a man is drinking 3 of them. Every year, the average man is drinking 19.4 litres of pure alcohol, which translates at about 3.5 bottles of wine a week, which is way too much. So, we have all of the problems and we're not asking for help. And that was why I wanted to write something that actually tries to meet men where they are. Where are they? Well, in my opinion, they're at sports events, they're watching James Bond and Star Wars, and they're cracking really awful jokes. So that is at the heart of the book. A lot of sports, a lot of film references, and a lot of really awful jokes. Sorry about that, guys.
I think what's interesting, so for me, starting this show was to have a platform where we could tell stories. People can tell their stories of struggle and resilience and how they were able to turn their life into their own definition of success, right? So my show is all about healing, talking about that sort of thing. So I'm definitely a mental health advocate, been there the whole 9 yards. Something that's sort of shifted for me in the last 1 to 2 years is a deeper understanding into why men drink, why women choose the bear. That's a hot now topic, right? And I think maybe some women would cancel me, I suppose. And you can't cancel what doesn't exist. I'm not that big yet. So anyway, or if that ever happens. But it's not entirely a man's fault. And I'm going to explain myself real quick because
No, I'm not cancelling you for that, but do elaborate.
yes. So this whole issue about men being predominantly the problem in alcohol, but not being the voice in alcohol, this is because men drink to cope, right? They turn to alcohol to numb feelings. This comes from generational and systemic programming. Like when you're a young boy and you run and you fall and you bump your knee, what's the messaging you're getting from day one? Okay, buck up, big boys don't cry. Like, It's just a little scratch, get over it, toughen up, be a man, like all of these things. And this, and women do it too, mothers do it as well, while they're softer about it, but they still do it. And then it's just a repeated beat in message. And it's so not even intentional on a lot of people's parts, but it's the message that we feed young boys repeatedly over and over and over. And they get it from their pastors, and they get it from their teachers and their coaches. And then built in the peer pressure with their guy friends, and it just keeps happening and happening all throughout life. Well, we know you're well intentioned, got to be a man, that sort of thing, but you're not teaching boys how to process complex emotion, how to process anger, how to process communicating in a healthy way. And all of a sudden they're in university, they find drink, maybe they find it earlier as you had. It's an outlet. I think that this, and I'm not blaming parents specifically here, I'm blaming generations, and I'm blaming society, because we don't make it okay for men to not be okay. And yes, I'm a feminist, and I get really pissed off, and I have a lot of strong value or views on men who hurt women in any form. But I think that was the trigger for me, is that, okay, but why are they hurting women? What could potentially be happening in their lives that is leading to all these men hurting women? It's not all men, but it is all women. It's the bear. There's this story. It's repeated. It's society. We don't allow room for men to grow up, to express their emotion.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the things that I would fill in on that, I suppose, is that I don't think we should underestimate the role of that the media plays in this. So if you look at the way men are always portrayed, we're always the tough guys, aren't we? So yeah, we don't we don't talk about our feeling. We punch things, and that's that comes right from a very early age. I mean, you look at even a lot of Disney. It's very, very stereotyped, the way men and women are portrayed. And I think there are more and more people who are openly talking about that. And I think that's really useful. And then, of course, we don't just get it when we're kids. We absorb the message, and then we start passing it on to each other. So when
Absolutely.
we hang around, in groups of guys, it's all the same message. You don't cry, toughen up. And of course, we get that from our fathers, because that was the message they got. That was what they learned. And, it will remain that way unless, we actually do something about it. And I would describe myself as a feminist as well. And I think if you look at the remarkable amount of progress that has been made over the last 120 years by the women's movement, it's massive. They really have got a lot of issues on the agenda. They've made a lot of change. I mean, no, I'm not sitting here saying that everything is perfect and all of the problems have been solved. But if you contrast the life of a woman 120 years ago with the life of a woman now, it's night and day, isn't it? Yeah. And you've got to kind of think about it and say, well, what is the difference between the life of a man 120 years ago and the life of a man now? And one of my favorite writers, Caitlin Moran, did sort of rather cheekily say the difference is we don't wear hats anymore. And I think there has been more progress than that. And, I see a lot of guys dropping their kids off and picking their kids up at school. And I see guys who are much more involved in their children's life than, even our fathers were. I know a lot of guys that cook, and some of them even clean. So, yes, we have made progress. But I think what's really missing is we haven't organized. And that's one of the reasons why these, specifically male issues just kind of aren't on the agenda. Why the sober sphere is not full of great examples of men who've stopped drinking and are talking about it, because there are a lot of examples of men who have stopped drinking, but we haven't organized and we haven't got the message out there. And you mentioned domestic violence, and domestic violence against women, I totally agree, it's a terrible thing, but we always talk about it as men against women, and of course it's far more complicated than that. There is such a thing as domestic violence committed by women on men. It tends to be
Absolutely,
different,
without question.
but we don't talk about it because there aren't the men out there who are organized in getting it on the political agenda.
It's fair. I think it's disproportionate, and it should be on the agenda and it should be talked about, right? But at the same time, it's one of those things. It's like I tried not to go on social media because I fall down rabbit holes, and it's never a good thing. But like that seems to be the response is, well, there's bad women too, but the value, like the proportion's not the same. And like a man can leave his house at any time of the day and not worry about being beaten up by a woman, being raped by a woman, or being kidnapped by a woman. It happens. It's not in the same proportion. So, but here's the thing. This is where it always gets tricky, right? Because you want to support women and their causes, DV and all that stuff, but you have to have the same space for men who experience the same thing. I'm all about mental health, but I have to be as equally about men's mental health as I am about women's mental health, and I would even say I have to be more vocal about men's mental health because there isn't enough representation about it. And like for me, most straight guys are not going to listen to little old me talk about men's mental health. I'm obviously in touch with my feminine side and can emote, all right? I look at you, wife, daughter, successful. You're the type of person that they need to see. And we need to see more men who are just men. Do you know what I'm talking about? Does that make sense? Am I coming across properly?
Yeah, no, I do know what you're saying, and I'm quite happy to listen to you. I think you're a great role model. I think you should continue doing what you're doing. And whilst we're on the subject, all of the listeners should go and give you 5-star reviews on, Apple, so to help you get your message out there. And I called the book "Real Men Quit," and then I like in a sort of like the irony of coming up with a title before you actually write the book, then sort of figured out that I'm going to have to actually talk about what it takes to be a real man, what defines a real man. And do you know what? Maybe it's a cop out. Maybe it's really my genuine conclusions from the research, but I don't think you can actually point at any real characteristics that make you a real man. I think it's just, getting yourself, in a position where you can be as good as you can, embracing what you lack. So, I mean, Jung talked about, male and female characteristics, and it is, of course, a generalization, but he talked about men being generally more into strength and order and women being more about feeling and understanding. And of course, that is the journey that we all must go on. We start off with some characteristics, we lack others, and we must try to develop those other characteristics. And, that's what we need. So long as you're comfortable with your own strength and order, and you've developed that bit of feeling and understanding, or you're comfortable with your feeling and understanding, and you've developed that bit of strength and order, that's all that we can ask. That's all that really makes sense to say that you're a real man. You've done as much work on yourself as you can, and you attempt to serve the people that are around you. I think that's as good a definition as you're ever going to get. So you're a real man, in my opinion.
Right? I think that's why I said just a man, because like this ideology that a man has to be this very specific type that society has been telling us for years and years and years, it's just not accurate.
Oh no, absolutely
there
not.
There are so many different variations of men as there are so many different variations of women.
Yeah.
Neither one is better or less. They're just human.
You know,
And
if
I
you
think that that's the messaging that we need to fight for, is that just be yourself, be authentically you,
And that really
and do
comes
what you say.
across in the research. So if you look at all of the meta-analysis, the studies of studies, what they show very strongly is you can take all of these things that we would generally consider to be, female characteristics like communication and, interpersonal skills. And you can take all of these, what we'd consider to be male characteristics like maths and science and leadership. And actually, if you crunch the numbers, there is only two genuine differences between the sexes. Only two things emerge. And that is that men masturbate more and they're better at catching balls. Everything else is up for discussion.
Yeah.
It is. I've never met a man that would argue with that.
I can't argue with you, but so it's why I'm laughing. I'm like, fair. I'll let you. We'll leave that. So you've written multiple books, correct?
Yeah. I wrote a couple about local government that are not very interesting, and then Real Men Quit's the most recent one. Before that was Get Over Indulgence, which is just kind of like my story, how I went from drinking, smoking, and eating junk food into being diagnosed as annoyingly happy.
Which it's interesting because, and we're at time. I always try to keep it under an hour, but I feel like I could probably talk to you for hours and hours and
I get
not
that
run out of
impression.
stuff to say. But it's the annoyingly happy part, and I think you're one of the first people that I've spoke to that have also employed cognitive restructuring in their life to facilitate healing, and then come out the other side, such as I have, and just see the beauty in all things life and understand that things suck. There are things that suck. There will always be things that suck. But you can still find beauty in them. And that's not an innuendo. I realized after it came out of my mouth, but there's beauty in everything. And I'm an annoyingly happy, super positive. Some people think that when they don't really know my story or know me, that I have toxic positivity. It's a new thing now. But I love to be alive. I love life. I am very happy with choosing to heal and come to where I am and getting to do this. So I love that about you. For everybody that's listening at home, I'm going to link all of Duncan's links in the description. So go check him out. So he's Sober Warrior Coach on Instagram. He's on LinkedIn and Facebook. He has his own website, y'all. You can get his book on Amazon, books on Amazon, and then he has a listener freebie, which I'm assuming is like a podcast type thing.
No, so if your listeners just want to put getover.uk into the internet, that is where I tend to direct people because spelling my name is a bit hard. So if you just put getover.uk into the internet, it takes you to a bit of my website where you can download a copy of Get Over Indulgence. That's the Kindle, the PDF. And if you can stand listening to me for 3 hours and 45 minutes, you can download the audiobook there as well.
Well, in North America, I think the common consensus is, which is a repetitive redundancy there, I think, common consensus. The consensus is that anyone with an English accent you can listen to for a long period of time. So I would encourage everybody to check out both books, Get Over Indulgence and Real Men Quit. If you're a man out there and you're listening today, or if you're anyone who knows a man who could definitely do with some self-work and healing. And I love your approach to your book because you really are meeting them where you're at. If you're telling inappropriate jokes and that sort of thing, like you're kind of like talking their language and doing it in a way where you can still drive home some really good points. It has been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you. Initially, I thought I was going to edit out the fart. I just said fart on. Wow. Initially, I thought I was going to edit out the part where he's like, I like to make people's wheels turn, and that got me a little flustered. Keep it real. I'm transparent. It is what it is. For anybody who's just listening, you'll have to check him out because he's actually really handsome.
You are such a charmer. I like you.
Sorry, I just tell it like it is. It's maybe not professional. Maybe men will be like, nope, not going to go on that show. I'm going to get hit on by this dude. I just tell it like it is. So thank you very much for being a guest. I wish you all the best. And yeah.
Oh no, thank you, man. That was a really interesting, in-depth conversation, and it is nice to be interviewed by somebody who obviously, really thinks about these things, and I love a deep thinker. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Yes, I think, but then my face looks like I don't know, having an aneurysm or something. But anyway, I'm glad that we got here.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@ccsims.com or visit ccsims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.